Call it Donald Trump's Al Capone defense. Today, on what is just the second day of Paul Manafort's trial, Donald Trump comparing his former campaign chair to the notorious mobster, asking who was treated worse, Al Capone, legendary mob boss, or Paul Manafort, political operative. Trump has made this bizarre comparison before.
With Paul Manafort, who really is a nice man, you look at what's going on with him, it's like Al Capone.
2005 tax case.
Or a case that I guess is very old. It's just a sad thing. It's a very sad thing for our country to see this.
So, to be clear, comparing a defendant to Al Capone is usually something prosecutors or critics do because as a story of crime and punishment, Capone is a person who did many bad things and got in trouble for only some of them, facing charges for tax evasion and not the other violence and murders that his gang was accused of.
You know he's making over $3 million a year, but he's paid no taxes. Nothing's in his name. If we can establish any payments to him at all, we can prosecute him for income tax evasion.
What?
I said we can prosecute him for income tax evasion.
Try a murder for not paying his taxes?
Well, it's better than nothing.
Try a murderer for not paying his taxes. That's the movie version. In real life, that 1931 trial was a national spectacle. There were cameras outside the Chicago courtroom. Citizens were gathered out front and obviously concerned about more than tax evasion. But because of his reputation as a violent gangster, famously also portrayed by Robert De Niro, there was the denial of violence with a twinkle in the eye.
I grew up in a tough neighborhood. And we used to say you can get further with a kind word and a gun than you can with just a kind word. And in that neighborhood, it might have been true. And sometimes a reputation follows you. There is violence in Chicago, of course, but not by me and not by anybody I employ.
Not by anybody I employ. Note that is a specific denial of a conspiracy, which is, of course, a key charge in the Russia probe. Now, that jury disagreed. Capone caught an 11-year sentence. Manafort faces more time than that if convicted, and legal experts do say the prospect of dying in prison can change the minds of even the most stubborn defendants, which applies to alleged tax evaders as well as mafiosos. So the question that hangs over what is now day 2 of this trial, why is Donald Trump comparing his former campaign chief to a gangster? And could this trial change Paul Manafort's mind, or is he ready to face the risk of prison and death, pondering, I don't know, some later salvation? To quote another man steeped in the criminal mindset, the musician Master P, the question may boil down to, is there heaven for a gangsta? Gangsta. Gangsta. Is there heaven for a gangsta? Gangsta. Gangsta. I'm joined now by Elie Honig, the former federal prosecutor for the Southern District of New York. He led the organized crime unit and even prosecuted a case against alleged mafioso John Gotti Jr., a perfect guest and expert for this, and Richard Painter, also back with me, a Senate candidate and former lawyer in a Republican administration. I begin with you. Is there heaven for a gangster, number one? 2, what in God's earth is Donald Trump doing comparing this man to Al Capone? And 3, when you look at the legalities of this case, how does it relate to how you approached mafia?
Yeah, there are a lot of parallels, Ari, between the kind of cases I used to do going against the mafia and this case, sad to say. But the number one similarity is you are trying to penetrate a closed, secretive, I'll say potentially criminal organization. And the number one way you do that is by flipping people, by getting cooperating witnesses. And I think you hit on something. I think the president is probably scared to death that Paul Manafort may try to flip if he's convicted. You read that as what's happening this week. In other words, for a long time, Trump dismissed Manafort and avoided talking about him. Lately, as we showed, he's been talking. We can even show he's been tweeting more about him lately, a handful more tweets, up from 0. You're saying that means what? Yeah, he could be trying to soften up Manafort. I think the biggest nightmare for Trump right now is if Manafort flips. And you said it. I agree with you. I do not think Paul Manafort is willing, if he gets convicted, to go die in jail. And if he gets convicted, he's 69 years old. He will die behind bars. So you think that is the change agent here? Yeah, I think it could be. You know, you can cooperate after conviction. You may not get as good of a deal. I've done it. I had a mob boss who we convicted of murder. He got sentenced to life. We thought he had dynamite information, same way Mueller might think Manafort has dynamite information. We went into the jail, and asked him if he would cooperate. He said no, he was an old school stand-up guy. But the point is, prosecutors are still sometimes willing to cooperate defendants after conviction.
But your office, and this is the office that now is handling the Michael Cohen case, I mean, you're educating us on some real interesting backroom stuff. You're saying that as a matter of prosecutorial tactics, you were prepared, even with a life sentence, to dial part of that back to get information.
Absolutely. It's a balance. It's how bad of a guy is it, but how good is his information? And the guy I was talking about, we thought he had the keys to the castle. And I think Manafort, can you imagine? Can you imagine getting to sit and debrief him as a prosecutor and learn everything he knows? It would be a gold mine. If I was in their shoes and I convicted Manafort and he was willing to come in, I'd absolutely pay the price for it.
That is fascinating coming from you as someone who led the organized crime work, and that's not a shoes many people have filled. As a prosecutor, you know how to spot unanswered questions. You did not answer the Master P question.
Is there a heaven for gangsters?
Yes.
I think so. I think they're sitting around like the old social clubs in Queens and having a coffee.
And that's a nice place. So there is salvation.
I think so.
Well, Richard Painter, having solved the more metaphysical aspect of this, I turn to you on Donald Trump's shifting approach to Manafort. Take a look at how he used to talk about him, because this does back up the point just made, that he is now warming to him after dismissing him. Take a look.
Paul Manafort was replaced long before the election took place. He was only there for a short period of time. Now, Paul Manafort's a nice guy, but, you know, he worked for me for a very short period of time, literally for, like, what, a couple of months? Little period of time. Like, Manafort has nothing to do with our campaign.
How do you view that shift, which has clearly changed now that the trial began?
Well, President Trump is very, very worried that Paul Manafort is going to flip on him, and I believe the prosecutors would offer Manafort a very good deal. Because from a law enforcement perspective, well, he's done some very bad things. He is not a threat to our society at this juncture. Donald Trump and various other people who are in high parts of our government are a threat, and there's an ongoing conspiracy to obstruct justice. There may very well be ongoing collusion with the Russians that is extremely dangerous for our national security. So the prosecutors are going to offer Manafort a very good deal. I certainly would if I were the prosecutors, to get the information on the people who are really dangerous, who have been colluding with the Russians, obstructing justice, and really have betrayed our country. So, yeah, if I were one of those people in the latter group, I'd be scared to death of Paul Manafort cutting a deal with the prosecutors.
The other thing about the Capone argument is there are even conservatives, right, who are not just reflexively Trump critics, who think this plays in to some public on-ramp to what would be a very controversial pardon, to say the least. I'm reading here from the Spectator, a conservative publication, quote, Trump is using the Capone comparison to set the stage to pull another Arpaio, depict Manafort as a victim of the deep state whose unjust predicament can only be rectified by a presidential pardon. Your thoughts?
Yeah, that could be the case as well. You know, I think there's a lot of signals being sent at a minimum here. And you know, the other possibility is, again, to use the mob lingo, Manafort is being a stand-up guy. And that means someone, you don't plead, you don't talk, you don't cooperate. You go through with your trial, you take your consequences. In the normal world, they go to jail. Here, it's an exceptional circumstance. So it could be the sort of unspoken understanding could be, Paul, you stand up and I'll take care of you.
Right, which is itself potentially inappropriate, yes?
Absolutely. I mean, it would be a very questionable use of the pardon power.
Right, and that goes back to a report we've done earlier on the show about how, while the pardon power is unilateral, so the president gets to do it, it has legal force immediately, as we all three of us know, that doesn't mean it can't be an abusive power, just like auctioning it off, or Blagojevich auctioning off a Senate seat, a unitary power that was an abuse.
Yeah, the fact that the president has a constitutional power doesn't mean he can't use it in a criminal way. I think that's a perfect example. What if the president tweeted, pardons for sale, $10,000 each, make check payable to Donald J. Trump? That has to be a crime.
Right. I do want to say, in fairness, the check would be made payable to the Trump Organization so that he could pay lower taxes on it.
Good point.
And I think you were unfair in saying it would be a personal check.
Good point.
I think that's Richard, I just want to be fair. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.